Shalom, my friends. Welcome to this week's word study. Today we're going to be talking about this catchphrase, the day of the Lord. You know, I don't like that, but we'll clear that up soon enough. This catchphrase is found throughout Scripture, and it always speaks of the 7-year tribulation, also known as the time of Jacob's trouble, also known as Daniel's 70th week. Now, when we see it in the first covenant, commonly called the Old Testament, nothing old about it, it's always referring to the day of Elohim's wrath. And, you know, as we see in Revelation, I'll point it out later, it's the day of Yahweh's wrath. It's also the day of the wrath of the Lamb, Yeshua. However, when we see this catchphrase in the renewed covenant, commonly called the New Testament, nothing new about it, then it's generally referring to the actual second coming of Mashiach, Yeshua, which is the very end of the tribulation. So wherever we see this catchphrase, the day of the Lord, it's always talking about the tribulation. But there's a difference. In the first covenant, it's talking about the wrath. And in the renewed covenant, it's talking about the end of the wrath, the second coming of Yeshua. Now, as you know, Lord, absolutely inappropriate. I think it's in Jeremiah. I'll put the scripture down here for you, where Abba Father says, you have caused my children to forget my name for Baal. Now, the English way of saying Baal is Lord. And, you know, I always have, it's like, why did they do that, you know? They take all the Aramaic Hebrew words and they make them English. Worst of all, they take the Father's name in more than 7,000 places and just take it out of the book and replace it with Lord, which is the English way of saying Baal. But here, you know, in Jeremiah, I hope I'm right about the book, I'm pretty sure it's Jeremiah, they don't change the Hebrew name. They leave it there as Baal. Really, it should say that Abba Father is saying, you caused my children to forget my name for Lord. Anyway, Lord is absolutely inappropriate. It is, this catchphrase is, the day of Yahweh. Now, it can be seen in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Zephaniah, Zechariah, and Malachi. And, you know, in some of the Renewed Covenant books, I believe it's in Acts, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, 2nd Peter, I forget, but, you know, I'm kind of like bypassing those because they are strictly references to the second coming, and I'm talking in today's study about the 7-year tribulation, the time of wrath. Now, since the first mention of any word or catchphrase always tells us something extra special, let's look at the very first mention in the word, you know, chronologically in the book, of the day of Yahweh. This is found in Isaiah, Yeshayahu, chapter 2, verse 12, which reads, and once again, let me remind you, I'm not reading from any particular English version. I'm expounding on the original Aramaic Hebrew and amplifying it for you in English to give the most accurate verbiage that I can. And if you read along with me in any English version, you'll clearly see I'm not adding to, I'm not taking away, I'm just making it more colorful and clearer. Verse 12, Isaiah chapter 2, says, "For the day of Yahweh of hosts." What is that host thing? I'm going to explain that in a minute. "For the day of Yahweh of hosts will be a day of reckoning against all who are proud and arrogant, against all who are lifted up so that they may be degraded and brought low." Now what's this Yahweh of hosts? The original Aramaic Hebrew word we see in English as hosts is tsaba. It's spelled Tsad, Beit, Aleph. In this instance, Tsad has to do with righteous hunting. Beit is the house and family of Yeshua, and Aleph designates Yahweh as the father and the headship. So it's the day of Yahweh of Tsaba. That would mean the day of Yahweh's campaign, with his organized army of soldiers conducting warfare at an appointed time. So that's what hosts is, Tsaba. It has to do with a hunting and a warfare campaign, an army. Now let's keep reading through to verse 21 in Isaiah chapter 2. Now we're looking at verse 13, where it says, he comes against all the cedars of Lebanon west of the Jordan that are high and lifted up, against all the oaks of Bashan east of the Jordan, against all the high mountains, against all the hills that are lifted up. High mountains, hills, these could be governments and, high mountains, big government structures, hills, smaller government structures, corporations, whatever. Verse 15, against every lofty tower. Again, mountains, hills, towers, walls, literal, but also metaphorically speaking. Every lofty tower, that's anything, anyone that, puffs its chest up, you might say. Against every fortified wall. Not only literal fortified walls, but, corporations that think they're protecting themselves with all kinds of legalistic paperwork and everything. Coming against that too. Verse 16, against all the ships of Tarshish and against all the desirable crafts. Everything in the world. Verse 17, then the loftiness of man will be brought down, and the prideful arrogance of men will be degraded and brought down. Yahweh alone shall be exalted in that day. Verse 18, and the idols will completely vanish. They will be abolished. Verse 19, and they, the stricken, those who were deprived of all in which they had trusted, will go into the caves of the rocks, into the holes of the ground, literally and metaphorically, fleeing from the terror and dread of Yahweh and from the splendor of his majesty when he arises to shake and terrify the earth mightily. Verse 20, in that day, Men will throw away their idols of silver and their idols of gold, which they made for themselves, as objects to worship the moles and the bats. Literally, metaphorically, people worship moles and bats, little carvings, whatever. Also, demonic energies, spirits. Verse 21, to go into the caverns of the rocks and into the clefts of the ragged cliffs as they flee from the terror and dread of Yahweh and the splendor of his majesty when he arises to shake and terrify the earth mightily. Those are powerful scriptures. Isaiah, Yeshayahu, he paints, the Ruach painted a powerful picture of the tribulation, the day of Yahweh, through those verses. Also in Isaiah chapter 13, verses 9 and 10, it says, the day of Yahweh is coming, cruel and fierce, with wrath and raging anger, to make the land a horror of devastation, and he shall exterminate its sinners from it. Verse 10, for the stars of the Shamayim, the stars of the heavens, and their constellations will not flash with their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not show its light. As a side note, I'm sure you'll agree with me that those scriptures describe something that Abba Father Yahweh would not allow his Kodeshim to suffer. It's describing things that Elohim would never allow his Kodeshim, his dedicated ones, to experience. But we'll get to that in a bit more detail later on in our study. Now, Isaiah, Yeshayahu, chapter 2, verses 12 through 21, that's the first mention of the day of Yahweh in the Word. It describes the tribulation well enough, but if you want to know more, and if you haven't yet read the book of Revelation with me, you'll see this graphic at the end of the video. You can click on it. And also, beneath this video, in the more info section, you'll see a text link that you can click on, and it'll take you over to my playlist, where the first video, I dip into Daniel chapter 9, and I talk about the 70 weeks and how they are laid out scripturally and historically. And then I go into the book of Revelation, verse by verse, chapter by chapter, and I explain everything as we go along. And again, if you haven't done this, I urge you to do it with me, because Revelation is the only book in the entire Word that promises a special beracha, a blessing, to those who read it and to those who hear it read. Okay, back to our study. There are those who say the day of the Lord also refers to the millennial reign of Yeshua, which happens after the tribulation. They say this because of two other catchphrases, this day and also that day, that is seen in English translations. And also because of the phrase, a day with Yahweh is as 1,000 years. And the millennium is, of course, 1,000 years. That's what millennium means. However, I do not agree with that reasoning at all. The phrase day of the Lord, more accurately, the day of Yahweh, is always connected with the darkness and the judgment of the 7-year tribulation. Whereas the phrases this day and that day are always associated with the glorious 1,000-year period subsequent to the tribulation, after the trib, known as the millennium. The day of Yahweh actually appears in the word as Yom Yahweh. But to verbalize that, one could say Hayom HaYahweh. Ha, you hear Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach means, there's interpreted poorly as spirit. It really means presence. The Father's presence, Ruach. Ha means of, and other times it could be the. And then Kodesh means dedicated. So Ruach HaKodesh is the Father's presence of dedication. So Ha Yom Ha Yahweh would be the day of Yahweh. Yom, of course, means day. We can see that in Strong's number H3117. Yom is spelled Yod, Wa, Mem. Yod, picture of an arm and a hand, has to do with, in this case, Yahweh's work, what he makes. Yahweh's actions, what he does. Wa, picture of the tent peg. It's also the number 6, which is the number of man. And Wa acts as a connector. So, it's connecting the Father's work and his actions with Mem, which is a picture of water. It has to do with the Word and the blood, Yeshua. And also Mem, and in this case it really applies, has to do with chaos. And, the tribulation is, chaos like no one has ever even dreamed. Then the word we see as Lord is found in Strong's H3068. It is Yahweh, Yod He Wah He. Yod, picture of an arm and a hand. Yahweh's work, what he makes. Yahweh's actions, what he does. He means behold, and it has to do with the Ruach. And we have Wa, picture of the tent peg. Number 6, number of man, acting as a connector. With behold, again, He, the Ruach. So, and by the way, a lot of people like to say that Yod He Wah He says, behold the nail, behold the hand. It's cute, and I suppose it makes a sort of sense, but I don't, I don't buy that one. Because that is interpreting the Father's name backwards. It's, not Yod He Wah He, it's He Wah He Yod. Hey, behold, Wah, the nail, Hey, behold, Yod, the hand. They're twisting it around to make it what they want it to be. And like I said, I ain't buying it. Yahweh, Yod He Wah He, more accurately says, see the work and the actions of the Father. Behold, and see how he pitches his tent and secures his way, the way, with mankind. Behold. That's accurate. So, the day of Yahweh, Yom HaYahweh, says. Here is the work and the actions of Abba Father as he pitches his tent and secures his way, the way with mankind, like it or not, based on his word through the blood of his bane, Yeshua. See the work and actions of the Father, behold, and see how he pitches his tent and secures the way with mankind. Behold. Now, there is another catchphrase we should look at relative to Yom HaYahweh, and that is Yom HaEvrah, the day of his wrath. The day, Yom, of his wrath. HaEvrah. The day of wrath occurs at least 4 times in the Word. Job chapter 21, verse 30. Proverbs 11:4, which says, riches do not profit in the day of wrath. Again, we're talking about the tribulation. Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 15, and Romans, Romaim, chapter 2, verse 5. The first mention of the day of wrath is seen in Job chapter 21, verse 30. Are there any KJV only groupies out there? Bring your ear close. I want everyone to know that practically all English versions, including the KJV, inaccurately, terribly inaccurately say in Job, that is Eov, chapter 21, verse 30, that the wicked are spared the day of calamity. The wicked are spared the day of wrath. Does that even make sense? I mean, the day of Yahweh's wrath, the day of Yeshua's wrath, the wrath of the Lamb, is against the wicked. They're not going to be spared the day of wrath. Every one of those are terribly wrong. The HalleluYah Scriptures gets it right. Hallelujah. And also the Amplified Bible gets it right, saying that the wicked are kept or reserved for the day of wrath or calamity. So, Eov, Job chapter 21, verse 30 says, the wicked, and by the way, I've said this in a good number of other videos, what's wicked? You know, people think, oh, he's wicked, he's a rotten, mean, evil, murderous kind of a person. No. The original Aramaic Hebrew, wicked means someone who is going their own way instead of the way, the narrow path, the way, Elohim's way, the narrow path that leads to Abba Father Yahweh, and the only way to the Father is through his Son. So the wicked, they're not going Elohim's way, they're not going the way, they go in their own way. That's wicked. Doesn't have to be mean, rotten, horrible. They're just like, you know, I don't believe in the Bible, I think the Bible means this, and I think, you know, God is love, and, you know, should be fair and treat everyone right, you know, and if a man wants to marry a man, I think that's fine. Who are we to say? That's wicked. That's going your own way, not Elohim's way. Okay, so the wicked, those who go their own way, are kept or reserved for the day of wrath, the day of disaster and destruction. They, the wicked, will be led away on the day of wrath. The day of wrath. The The wicked are reserved, and they're not spared it. I'm sorry, I really get upset. You know, the people who do these interpretations, you would think they would do it with much prayer and sincerity, but when you see sentences like that, you're like, who were they, like drinking Kool-Aid that day, or what? I don't get it. Yom Evrach, day of wrath. You could say Yom Ha-Evrach. Day, Strong's H3117, Yom, spelled Yod, Wa, Mem. We already looked at that. We've already looked at Yom. Let's take a look at the word we see as wrath, Evrah. That's Strong's H5678. It's spelled Ayin, Beit, Resh, He. Now, if you have my book, Lashon HaKodesh Kadam, you'll know that I left space with each oat for you to make notes. Ayin here's one you can make a note, because I have Ayin listed as a guttural sound, like but in this case, with Evrah, Ayin is pronounced E-H. So you should make a note in your copy of Lashon HaKodesh Kadam under Ayin. Ayin, picture of an eye, has to do with watching, has to do with knowing, has to do with the Word and the Ruach converging. Beit, picture of a house, has to do with Yeshua, the house of Yahweh. Resh, picture of a man's head, has to do with headship, has to do with thoughts. And then we have He, picture of a spiritual man with his hands up, praising. It says, behold, has to do with the Ruach. So, wrath, English, the original Aramaic Hebrew word, Evrah, is Elohim watching and knowing who the wicked are. It's the word Yeshua and the Ruach HaKodesh converging, working in unison as the army and the house of Yahweh to enact the thoughts and headship of Abba, Father Yahweh. Behold, the day of wrath. Now, that brings up, there's another way that we know the Kodeshim, that is those who are dedicated to Elohim and to Elohim alone, are spared the day of his wrath. I got caught up there because, in Job, they said the wicked are spared the day of wrath. No, the ones who are spared the day of wrath are the Kodeshim, the ones who are dedicated to Elohim, the ones who love Elohim more than anything of this world. We see that in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, that's Thessalonikim, chapter 5, verse 9, where we read, Elohim did not appoint us to wrath. That is, he has not destined us to incur his wrath. He did not choose us to condemn us. No, he chose us to obtain deliverance through our Adon Yeshua HaMashiach. Verse 11 tells us to encourage one another with these words, just as 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 18 tells us. And what is that all about? Let's back up to verse 16 where we read, because the Adon Yeshua himself will come down from the Shamayim, the heavens, with a shout of command, with the voice of a chief malach, angel, and with the blast of the trumpet of Elohim. Not a shofar blown by men, celebrating Moedim, feast days. No, this is the trumpet of Elohim. And in Corinthians, where it talks about, at the last trump, everybody thinks that's, one of the feast days, at the last trump. I don't know. It might be talking about the Moedim being celebrated in the Shamayim, and that particular last trump is blown by Elohim. Nobody could blow one that loud or that long. The last trump, it is blown as long as the guy blowing the shofar can, expel breath, as long as possible. This here is talking about the trumpet, the shofar of Elohim. This is nothing earthly here, my friends. And the dead in Mashiach will rise first. Verse 17, then the living who remain on the earth will simultaneously, same time. Sometimes we think, it's afterwards because it says then. No, simultaneously, the original language delivers that those who, first the dead in Mashiach, they're going to be raised up. Now, don't misunderstand. The dead in Mashiach, they're already in the Shamayim. Their spirit and their souls are alive, and they are with friends and family, but they are waiting for the Netchetef just as eagerly as we are, because they want to get their bodies back. What is going to be brought up out of those graves is the dust of the remains of their body. It's going to be brought up and transformed, and they're going to get their bodies. Then we who are still on the earth alive will simultaneously, at the very same moment, be caught up. Most English versions say caught up. The original Aramaic says netchetef, kidnapped. The Greek says harpazo, violently snatched up. Together with them, those whose dust was taken out of the graves, in the clouds, to meet the Adon Yeshua in the air. And so we will always be with the Adon. Now, people who say the rapture happens in the middle of the tribulation or at the end of the tribulation, nobody goes up to meet Yeshua in the air at the second coming. At the second coming, he's coming with those who went up to meet him in the air before the tribulation even began. They're all dressed in white. It's like, I cover all that stuff. I have a playlist on the rapture. I'll put a link to that also beneath this video. In the more info section, there'll be a text link you can click on, and I have, more than a couple of dozen videos, cover every aspect of the subject you could dream of. It's all covered and explained. Finally, verse 18, therefore, comfort and encourage one another with these words. Now, there's another point. The word doesn't say we should comfort and encourage each other about going through the tribulation and suffering the day, the awesome, indescribably horrifying day of his wrath. You can't comfort one another with that. It's like, don't worry, you're going to suffer like nobody ever did. That's not. He says, comfort and encourage one another with these words. We're going to meet Yeshua in the air and we'll be with him forever. And, we are not appointed to suffer the day of his wrath. We saw that. And the Kodeshim, they come dressed in white. They come with Yeshua at the end of the trib. At his second coming, they are already with him. Now, also, Revelation chapter 14, verse 10. Revelation, that's Chazon. Chapter 14, verse 10 speaks of the wrath of Yahweh, while Revelation chapter 6, verse 16 speaks of the wrath of the Lamb. So, the Father, during the tribulation, the Father is expressing his wrath on the universe. And Yeshua is also expressing his wrath. This is unimaginable to me, and I imagine to everyone hearing my voice, unless if you're watching this during the trib, especially the second half, the last 3.5 years of that 7-year period, you'll know what I'm talking about, but I'll tell you right now, we can't imagine it. So, the great and awesome Yom HaYahweh, the day of Yahweh, and also the great and awesome Yom HaEvrah, great and awesome day of his wrath, is about to occur, my friends. I just did last Tuesday's news, and I try and keep the news down to 10 minutes, 12 max, and a couple of weeks ago it was like 24 minutes because I had to get everything in. Last Tuesday, I think it was 23 minutes. I honestly, at the end, I sum everything up, and I think I started laughing at one point because it kept going on and on and on. Things are really escalating. And I also pointed out that the seventh Shemitah has just ended. So what ensues is Elohim's judgment. And we're about to see the last final blood moon, which is a super blood moon seen over Israel on September 28th. That's the completion of the blood moon tetrad, which is signs in the heaven, a warning sign. When you're driving down the highway, the sign comes up before the actual event or exit happens. So that's closing out, and it usually has to do with wars. So I think, we're about to enter the early stages, about to enter the introduction of the tribulation beginning, which means the Netchatef is just a moment away. Anyway, that's our study for this week, my friends. The day of Yahweh, Yom HaYahweh, and the day of wrath, the Yom HaEvrah. As always, I hope and I pray that this study is a beracha to you and yours. Abba willing, I'll see you here again next week. Until then, shalom, my friends.
Now 2,000 years have gone by, it's another working day. Some would rather let it lie. But the question still remains.